an experience of what we will call car rallies. And we have them primarily in the Silver Spring and the Gaithersburg areas. And these are car enthusiasts in which they just want to hang out. It was something that people could do during COVID because you could socially distance. They're proud of their cars that they've been working on. And 90% of the people that are going to these car rallies are honest, law-abiding citizens. It's that 10% that create the havoc that make everything look bad. So when we get into the presentation, Captain McBain will talk about, the comprehensive plan we're looking to engage. But I wanted to validate the citizens' observations that the quality of life in regards to traffic has decreased. Even with traffic volumes not being at the pre-COVID rate, we're seeing a lot of that still going on, and we're working collectively to deal with that. And in today's presentation, we're going to talk primarily about traffic enforcement for traffic safety. Dave McBain, who took over for me as the Director of Traffic, and I are trying to revitalize traffic and traffic enforcement in Vision Zero in our community, get officers in the community to re-engage. So I want to talk about things to put them into perspective, what we're looking at, try to answer some questions that have come up in the recent months to try to get everybody back on the same page. Susan, if you go to the next slide for me. Annually, what a lot of people don't realize, there are 20,000 traffic crashes in which 10,000 of them engage in, require a traffic report. And I will tell you, as a police officer, crime occurs every day, but every one of these 20,000 crashes to our community members is a traumatic event. People love their cars, whether they're right, whether they're wrong. Every traffic crash comes with emotion and comes with something where the police officers have to respond and have to have a professional appearance. When we look at the fact that we also stop approximately 120,000 vehicles, these 140,000 traffic contacts are critically important. And we recognize that we have to do a better job in managing every one of these 140,000 contacts so that people feel that they dealt with by a professional law enforcement agency with respect, and that we're handling this appropriately. And although not everybody's going to like the outcome of these encounters, the bottom line is we want to make sure that they know that people are treated with respect and fairly, and that's about the best we can do. There's been a lot of dialogue of potentially civilianizing traffic responsibility. As Ms. Barat told you, every officer has a responsibility for traffic. 1,300 of us out there have a responsibility for traffic. And when it comes to Vision Zero, we need many, many more than that. That's not even close to enough people. But I will point out to you, traffic is inherently dangerous. About 1/3 of all the police officers that are killed in this nation are killed in traffic-related events. So what may seem to be very simple, very easy, or a lot of people say it's just traffic, it's not that. And if you've ever been to a fatal crash scene, you'll know that these fatal crashes are violent crime. There is great carnage that occurs on a roadway, and cars are more dangerous than guns sometimes on officers on hits. So when we talk about traffic, it's not something that we take lightly. We have Captain Cojino, so at the end we can talk about different traffic things, but we put the officers well over 100 hours of traffic-related training, and that's just the bare minimum to get them out on the road. The traffic is something we see that's important, it's significant, and it's something in part of our core function. And as I said, the last bullet, no matter what the interaction is, we have to make sure that people recognize that every contact is professional and it could be a positive interaction. Next. When we start looking at the data, and we do a lot of things driven with the data, you can see that over time, on this chart, it's a little hard, but you'll see some other charts a little bit later, that you'll show that When I started on the police department in 1986, we issued tickets. There was no such thing as a warning. A warning was not something that we did because you believed that everybody lied to you about their driving record. In 2015, we implemented what's called electronic ticketing. And then as we involved our younger officers that are very technological savvy, they showed us that there was a new way. They utilize these e-tics program. They're able to talk about and look and see on what the drivers have done. And with this information, they become a gentler and kinder group. They look to see the people's driving record off their mobile data terminal, and they can tell that they have a good driving record, and we've increased the warnings. If you start looking at the charts, you'll see over time the number of tickets have gone down and the number of warnings have gone up. And what we're looking at from a national perspective, because I'm on the International Association of Chiefs of Police Highway Safety Committee, is looking at going from 100%, citations down to about 30 or 40% citations. So we're going to start looking at handling things and giving warnings as warnings are appropriate. But when we see that people are not responding to the warnings, utilizing the computer system, we'll start giving the tickets. Next, please.
Before we go on to that, I did want to point out that SERO is the safety equipment repair orders.
Correct.
Right.
Right. So warning, and then you'll see they're in mine, and we'll get into that. We have a whole section dealing with that. On this slide, we want to show, the number of traffic stops. And when we talk about things, we talk about efforts. And we're focusing on efforts. When you make that traffic stop, you make that traffic encounter, you have the opportunity to educate and have that encounter. The red line is what we call outcomes, and that's citations and warnings. So when we look at things and we start talking and Dave starts going out and promoting, we promote efforts. And if we are going to address the problem the council member Navarro and everybody has put up, we need efforts. We have to go out and make these stops. We need to be high visible, and we need to let people know that we're out there. But we need to then focus on the efforts, but not necessarily the outcomes. The officers, as I just explained, using the computer system, can see the people that are not responding to warnings will get the citations, but we now focus on efforts and outcomes, which would be the traffic stops and then the violations. Next. And then you can see between the red and the blue lines, in 2014, we issued more citations than we did warnings. And then you can see the trend is changing, where equipment repair orders have dipped slightly, but they never really became as much of a force. We do that to reinforce the equipment repair, the automated enforcement, the state equipment violation program. But you can see the trend over time, which I think is significant. You're seeing our warnings are going up and our citations are going down. So the police department is responding and has been doing this over time. This didn't just happen recently where we're just stopping giving tickets. This has started years ago, and this is a progress that we've been working in that direction. Next. One of the questions we were asked was, what are the primary violations that we've been giving out? And you can see the number one violation is speeding. It will always be speeding. You'll see down at the bottom we have cell phone violations and, of course, drunk driving. Everybody knows that. A lot of the violations that you see in here is driving while suspended, driving without a driver's license. And then you'll see two that talk about, well, let me go with those first. A lot of those situations, the reason why the number of citations are high is when we catch somebody that is driving without a license and driving suspended. For prosecution in the courts, the state's attorneys have asked us to issue multiple citations because there are different levels of charges, and it gives the prosecutors the discretion to drop some and to deal with it back there. So although these numbers are high, you will see that is because a lot of them are dealing with proportional number of tickets. You'll see there are 2 violations on this list, which is failure to display your license and your registration to a police officer. What those violations are generally, officers stop people, which would be called a moving violation or a point violation. And this is a charge that officers have issued people in the past where they were able to reinforce the negative driving behavior by a ticket, but they didn't give them points. They gave them a break. So when you see these violations, know that somebody was stopped for something else they did on the road, and most of the time the officers are giving them a break. Or with the e-tickets, it's just as easy to click that box and giving them a warning for that so it shows up on the data. So we want to be focused on safety-related violations. Captain McBain will go into more detail as we look to reorganize our traffic focus, how we will take this even further down to the next step. Next. Okay, we were asked to talk about the different types of officers. And when we talk about officers, patrol officers are a majority of the police officers on our roadways. And their patrol officers' primary responsibility is to handle the calls for service, provide the community service out there. And when they do traffic enforcement, they're doing traffic enforcement when they're given directed assignment from the command staff or between calls for service. But when you start looking at the numbers, about 80% of the traffic stops that are conducted by the patrol officers, and that's because there's about 700 of them compared to the handful of traffic officers we have out there. We have approximately 46 traffic officers, full-time officers that ride the motorcycles, and their primary responsibilities is enforcing traffic laws, providing educations, and responding to traffic crashes. This is their focus. Traffic enforcement for traffic safety is what they do. They're a small number of them, but we use them to target in our high priority areas that Dave will talk about. And then our district community action team, as Susan alluded to earlier, this is our teams of officers, and they do a lot of our pedestrian enforcement, and they're currently doing a lot of the muffler and the loud exhaust and the equipment violations, and they go out and essentially solve community problems. Next. So now we're getting into the Vision Zero phase of it. I'm going to talk very slightly, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dave and Wade. Real quick, the first 2 things I want to point out is traffic enforcement is a year-round initiative. Go to the next slide for me. Traffic enforcement is a year-round initiative. You hear us doing a lot of promotions like this time of the year when we talk about drunk driving or with the time change, pedestrian safety. But all year round, we have initiatives that work collectively throughout the state, throughout the different counties. And we receive NHTSA money from the federal government through the state to conduct additional enforcement in addition to what we would regularly do. Next. And then we deal with a series of waves of enforcement. And when you look at these waves, these are the big focus areas: distracted driving, seat belts. And you will find that in most deaths, either speeding is always a factor, but seat belts or impairment are contributing factors as well. Aggressive driving and pedestrian safety. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dave and Wade to talk about our Vision Zero approach and what we plan to do with our reorganization of the traffic code.
Thank you, Chief. Appreciate the time today with council. Thank you very much for this opportunity. So I want to real quick talk about what we've looked like for at least what I could say is the last 27 years that I've been on the department, and where we're going, or where I envision us going as a traffic safety division for the police department. As Chief Dadoun indicated, patrol officers in our Patrol Services Bureau are responsible for 80% of the traffic stops. But so that other 20% is specialized units, and one of those units or say 6 of those units are motor officers or traffic officers that work decentralized in all 6 of our districts. If we're at full capacity, we're at approximately 48 officers, and that's 7 supervisors, 7 corporals, and then a remaining 36 patrol officers or officers that are traffic focused. And so that's how we've existed ever since I can remember. And in just a little bit, I'm going to talk about our vision about transitioning into a more centralized plan and response to traffic safety. So what do we ask of our traffic officers? Unlike patrol, who have a whole bunch of other responsibilities during their day or night, traffic officers focus on traffic safety. And so what the guidance that we give and what we expect of them is to focus on the 5. Around the country, you hear focus on the 5, and depending on the jurisdiction, whether it's San Francisco being a city or more rural areas, or something like Montgomery County that has a combination of both, everybody has a different 5. And as this slide indicates, our 5 really is distracted, occupant protection, which is seatbelts, impaired driving, aggressive driving, which now is aggressive by the state standard is now speeding, and then pedestrian safety. So those are the things that we deploy our motors throughout the county on, and we have them focus on. And really, these 5 areas of concern are really what Vision Zero, as far as enforcement is concerned, and engineering and the focus of Vision Zero, this is what we're targeting, because these are the violations that are hurting people and killing people. So the days in the past where we would have our traffic units go out and kind of fend for themselves, or pick a location in the county that they wanted to work, or focus on something that they just had a desire to enforce, like a stop sign or other minor violations. Those days are somewhat gone, although we do give traffic officers the latitude to not just do these focused enforcements, but to spend some time out and about, being visible in the neighborhoods. So where do we go and why? Everything is data driven now. If you look at Vision Zero, everything is about the data. Purposeful policing. What's the purpose for us to go into a certain location? And so what we do is it's a coordination between our analysts, which happens to be a gentleman named T. Lohr, and Wade Holland, and we look at other data sets to figure out where are we having collisions and why we're having those collisions, and we deploy in those locations. So at the end of the day, we're going to locations because there's a purpose for us to be there, and the purpose is to reduce the number of collisions in that area. I'll transition that over to in Vision Zero. You'll hear see talk of high injury networks. Part of my job, I think, in this position as director of traffic division, something I've become more involved in is working with Wade, but also working with John Hubler and DeJuan Morris with with Department of Transportation, and in coming up with these high injury networks, identifying areas in the county that we're seeing more collisions based on a number of different things: engineering, environment, and also violations, dangerous activity. And so we've participated and we've assisted the Department of Transportation in obtaining data, specifically speed data, so that they can identify these networks and they can make the recommendations for future engineering changes. But also, in addition to the engineering change, there's got to be some enforcement that has to take place. In fact, I would say that enforcement is almost a stopgap while the engineering is getting done. We talk about road digest, where we're shrinking roadways, or we're putting up curbs or circles in certain locations, but those things cost a lot of money. They take a lot of time, and in the meantime, we try to focus our efforts in those locations to do enforcement. Again, speaking about the high injury networks, once they've been identified and the studies have been posted, we look at why people are having collisions and where are they occurring. And so we work in conjunction with DeJuan Morris for his education and outreach and prevention efforts, and we mirror where he goes. So when we go into a location, say Crabs Branch Road, where we're seeing the number one cause for collisions on Crabs Branch are left-turning vehicles. So DeJuan Morris and Traffic Department of Transportation will go into the area. They'll work on an education component, and then the police will come in, and then we start doing efforts like Chief Dadone talked about. We start investing time in the location, and yes, we do write and issue citations, but we also issue warnings. So that's where we focus our efforts with our traffic division. And obviously, I know we're talking about traffic safety, but we also rely on our traffic officers to navigate VIP movements like POTUS in the county. And anytime we receive a request for a very large funeral, we find it's important to move those funerals or move those escorts through the county, because we have control and we can keep it safe. So they have a number of other things they do other than traffic safety, but their main focus is traffic safety and enforcement. So I want to now transition over to, I talked about when I opened up what we looked like and what we've looked like for many years. And just to go over that again, we are set up that each district station, all 6 district stations, have a traffic unit. It's typically when it's fully staffed, a sergeant, corporal, and 6 patrol officers or motor officers. And here's where we started seeing the problems. Because they're decentralized, it's very disjointed. We have 6 different ways of doing traffic safety throughout the county. We have conflicting priorities where we're putting details over enforcement, or our enforcement is different in certain parts of the county based on, what a commander or a traffic sergeant feels is a priority. And so it becomes very disjointed. And so the plan that I've been working on, and COVID definitely stymied our progress on this, but the plan is to centralize the traffic division, bring most of our traffic officers under one roof, under the traffic division. And what does that do? That gives one direct, we bring everybody under one roof, listening to one captain with the same goal, the same vision, the emphasis on Vision Zero, and everything is done out of one division, with our efforts all reflecting the same response. So what does that look like? Because a lot of times what people will say is, well, if you bring everybody under one roof, the commanders are going to lose a little bit of influence on what gets done in their districts. And by the time the commanders heard of a complaint, usually council has heard the same complaint, and it usually is coming from council because a constituent's not happy about concerns they might have in their neighborhood. So what we're doing is, or the plan would be, is that yes, we're bringing most of our traffic resources here to the central traffic division, but we're leaving 1 to 2 traffic officers at each district station, and their new role is a traffic complaint officer, and they'll work hand to hand with their district commander, with the council, in addressing concerns, traffic issues in our neighborhoods. Ms. Navarro, you brought it up, the concerns for cut through traffic and safety. Well, that is not something that we would devote the traffic division to right out of the gate. That would be a community complaint issue where the traffic complaint officer at the district station, say in the 4th district, would go out, make a recommendation to the commander about what they would do for enforcement, and then they would put in place the steps in order to do enforcement, education, prevention in that area. Now, what that does is it leaves the traffic officers in Central, it leaves them with the ability to focus on our major arterial roadways. And so these officers will go to HINs, they will go to do high visibility enforcement in locations that, the data would suggest. I'll also say, and what we have been doing in a kind of decentralized model, excuse me, is we've been looking at suggestions from the Vision Zero model. And if you go in there, Vision Zero suggests multiple, I think 10 county roads and 10 state roads where they recommend that we do enforcement because of the injury collisions that we've been having on those roadways. And that's where we focus a lot of our attention. But also, these locations, although they kind of stay stagnant, they continue to be problems. We also have other areas throughout the county on major arterial roadways where issues crop up and where we have to push our resources. So, but I think by bringing everybody under one roof, we have one plan, we have one set of goals, and we basically can operate a lot more efficiently under Vision Zero. So that's where I think we're going to be going, and I think it could be very successful. I'll turn it over to Wade, just if he wants to add anything.
Thank you, Captain McGinn, and thank you, and good morning to the council members, and thank you for holding this hearing today. Just want to echo, with Captain McBain in the last year, even despite COVID, we've really worked on improving communication between all the different offices, even though we're all separate and no longer in Rockville and Gaithersburg anymore. But so one of the things we've done this year is, basically, the fatal crash comes in, we get an immediate report from the collision reconstruction unit. It actually still goes to SHA, and also initial details go out to NCDOT about that crash. So even though, they can't share all the details from a preliminary crash because there's a lot of information that will go into potential criminal charges, DOT and SHA are at least notified immediately that there was a fatal crash. And also if our collision reconstruction or anyone on the scene notices something that's really out of whack, potentially, they're also notifying and using what they see on the roadway to notify our engineering and design teams about any things that they see at the scene of the crash. So little things like that have really improved, and we've systematized it so that, basically within a couple hours of a fatal crash, we're getting notified. And to Captain McBain saying also that, really having just things like shared calendars and shared kind of meetings between DOT, NCPD, my office, Public Information Office has really helped to make sure everyone knows where they're at and what they're doing on certain roads, so that we can actually do more joint campaigns. It's been really important. And last thing I want to say about with the enforcement piece is, I think there's been a lot in the conversation, obviously, about, what's the role of enforcement in Vision Zero? You see certain folks saying, well, should we take it out completely? How do we modify it? How do we change it? I do want to just point out that when we think about Vision Zero, we think about what we can do to make our roadways safer. yes, ideally, we will get to a place where we have re-engineered pretty much every single arterial. The target speed and the design speed matches the speed limit so that people aren't speeding because the roadway basically makes it so you don't want to speed. However, that's about a couple $100 million and about a couple decades away. So before we get to that kind of ideal place, we definitely need to have enforcement of the laws to make sure that people are obeying the speed limit, not only for their own safety, but the safety of others on the road. And what we want to make sure that we do for Vision Zero enforcement is to make sure it's, yes, data informed and also evidence driven. And actually, when we look at the evidence, we know that enforcement is an effective tool in making roadways safer. So we look at things like the NHTSA countermeasures that work documents. We look at the FHWA toolbox of countermeasures and also studies of our own programs here in Montgomery County. We found them to be very successful. So as we mentioned, if we're doing targeted driver enforcement at crosswalks for pedestrian safety, which is one of our emphasis areas, the data has shown in the past that it can reduce pedestrian involved crashes by up to 23%, which can be just as effective as some of the other countermeasures you look at in terms of street lighting or potentially raised crosswalks. We look at publicized sobriety checkpoints. Again, those can be very effective by reducing alcohol-related crashes up between 17 and 20%. And if we see automated speed enforcement like we have in Montgomery County, we have a very successful and broad automated enforcement program, we actually see it can reduce severe collisions, which were, again, the ones we're worried about the most in the Vision Zero mindset, up to 20% as well. So we see that these can be very evidence-driven, that if we use enforcement correctly in our community, that we can save lives, we can reduce injuries, and that we want to make sure that if we have it in our program, we're also focusing equity. So I'll also want to go back to our equity task force that we held in 2019, and we also looked at all areas of Vision Zero. And when we looked at enforcement, that was kind of the recommendations that we had, and that's why this kind of slide came up, was they really wanted to see that focus on the 5, that our enforcement should really be focused on the most dangerous behaviors, not just, smaller violations that may or may not lead to actual safety outcomes. So that's really where some of the centralized traffic enforcement ideas came out of, and where this kind of focus on the 5, or if you're in Toronto, the big 4 ideas came out of. So focus on safety, focus on evidence, and also focusing on equity will end up with a place, as Chief Didone mentioned, it's more respectful. People know what we're doing, and they know that we're making our roadways safer. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro. I'm sorry. 1 second, Chief. Councilmember Navarro had a question. I don't know if she wanted to ask it now or whether she wanted to wait.
After the presentation would be great.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Chief. I interrupted you. Please continue.
No, just Susan, the next slide, because Wade was talking about the Vision. Go next slide after that. Yep. He was talking about the Vision Zero Equity Task Force, and we call it purposeful policing, but we want to focus on safety violations for safety reasons. There are officers that will do regulatory enforcement when they see the tag expired or whatever, but we want to focus our traffic officers onto priority or focused policing. And as you can see, we're trying to get all on board in Vision Zero. We're still leaving officers to handle the community complaints. We know the complaints are important, and we want to then use patrol officers to get more engaged to direct in dealing with community as their community issues as well. So that's our goal in dealing with our regular enforcement. Next. Switching gears a little bit into automated enforcement. Mr. Hetherington may pipe in and help me out with this, but the next slide, please. One of the things a lot of people don't know is Montgomery County is the only program in the nation that has had 2 independent evaluations of our program and have both found to be not only do we change behavior, but we have actually reduced collisions. The Insurance Institute for Highway Safety conducted 2 separate evaluations, and through those, they made us a model for the nation. NTSB, NHTSA have also done their own little studies and safety studies with automated enforcement, as well as our OLO did a study parallel to the IIHS and found it. So Montgomery County program is a model program, is based on management. It's based on data driven. There's a structured process in place, and that's why it's been successful. Next. The program has unique, and I think it's important that the council understands, Montgomery County is the only community in the state that is allowed to have residential enforcement on our roadways. Only everybody else in 2009, when they got to participate in automated enforcement, they can only do it in school zones. Now, this is really, we've been very respectful and very treasured with this because the other communities in the state would love to take this privilege away. We got this because we were grandfathered in because we pioneered automated enforcement for the state. We showed it was successful, and we got the rest of the state to be able to use automated enforcement. We have this, but every year in the General Assembly, people try to take away this privilege in Montgomery County, and if they did so, it would be devastating for our traffic safety program. So we are very respectful of this, and we are very cognizant that it's a blessing, and we try to do well. When we look at the site selection, we talk about criteria. It's data-driven. It's defensible. It came with initially citizen review, but it's structured for very, very, very important reasons. When we start moving into the next phase, Captain McBain is working on the RFP. When we get to the next phase and we're able to implement the new contract for red light and speed, we will be doubling the number of cameras. Mr. Hetherington, who's a program manager, is a former assistant chief for Frederick City. He is also, which also has an automated enforcement program. He is very experienced. And what Mr. Hetherington and I are working with Captain McBain is we are going to start integrating some of these speed cameras out of the standalone program and into the Vision Zero traffic enforcement initiative. We're going to start mixing in a hybrid model, traditional enforcement with technology, whether it's the speed and signboards and we're with its automated enforcement cameras and red lights into our traditional enforcement and our community concerns so that we have a more comprehensive program that addresses the community needs more efficiently, more effectively, with an increased high visibility and deterrent effect. And it's been taking us a while to get there. The procurement for a new automated system is 2 years. I've been through this, my third contract. We can't get these things done in any shorter time through procurement, but we know in 2021 we will have the new RFP in place, and we will be able to double the number of speed cameras, red lights cameras, and under Mr. Hetherington's watchful eye, we will integrate this hybrid approach, and we will be more efficient and more successful. And this was the overall goal, but it took us a while to get there, but it's on the door. And once we get started, I think everybody in the community will be safer and happier. Mr. Hetherington, any response to that before I go to the next slide?
Sure. As Chief mentioned, I've been doing this a long time. This is my 30th year in law enforcement. As he said, I started in Frederick. I created an automated enforcement program there. That was part of my duties other duties as assigned at one point. And I've been doing it here for going on 5 years. I do want to echo what the Chief said. This program is recognized across the nation, if not around the world. I get calls every week from all around the country, from jurisdictions that have read the studies. They understand what we are doing and the success that we've had. They want to start a program, and they call us to show them how to do it. We have taken this to a higher level, utilizing data as we determine where we're going to place cameras, how long we're going to keep them there, and what the effect of them are. I get requests daily from neighborhoods around the county that are asking for cameras. We have a very specific, detailed criteria where we look at things that when I explain this to residents, they have no idea some of the things we take into consideration. For instance, a residential street where they allow on-street parking. Those types of things block the view of our cameras. The biggest thing that I spend significant amount of time explaining to people is that, for instance, there's a 25-mile-an-hour posted speed limit. There may be cars traveling 30, 35 on that road on a regular basis. We can't enforce until 37. So there's a bit of a rub, if you will, between what the program is capable of doing legislatively, what we've been legally allowed to do. We can't enforce until 12 miles an hour over the speed limit. So when we do these speed studies, we focus on the 85th percentile speed. We look at the engineering of the roadway. We look at the number of vehicles out of the total number of vehicle passes that are traveling at a rate of speed that is within the enforceable range where we can issue citations. It doesn't do much good to have a camera sitting alongside the road not issuing citations. We're not changing behavior that way. And that is the whole purpose of this program, is to get voluntary compliance with posted speed limits, or at least lower than the enforceable range. So we spend a lot of time interacting with citizens and homeowners groups and property management companies, getting this educational piece out there so they understand. There's a lot of places that in the county that are, for lack of a better term, camera worthy. Just since COVID has started, I've gotten well over 85 requests for cameras in places that we never imagined we would get requests for. We've gotten them for a cul-de-sac that is less than a block long. I've gotten a complaint or a request where a resident said, we have a neighbor who speeds down the road every day. We want you to put a camera there to catch this one individual person. They've called the police. The police have been out there. They've talked with this resident. And I'm getting all this information from the person making the request. An officer has knocked on the door and spoken with this person. It's a cul-de-sac, and they want us to put a camera there permanently for one resident. These are the types of conversations that I have on a daily basis with people. I have requests for places that, looking at on paper, without even doing anything, I believe could be potentially good sites. Places on Connecticut Avenue, Georgia Avenue, University Boulevard. But the key thing to remember is, like the Chief said, we can only do residential. If the area is zoned commercial, we can't go there. If it's zoned agricultural, we can't go there. It has to be zoned residential with a speed limit of 35 miles an hour or less, or it has to be designated a school zone. And we don't get to make that designation. The school has to request that designation from the state. The state has to approve it. They have to put up the proper signage. And then, and only then, we still go through the evaluation process. Just because it's designated a school zone doesn't necessarily mean it's going to meet our qualification. We have these very strict qualifications so we can justify to the elected officials, the citizens, my bosses, that we're putting these cameras in the right place for the right reasons. We can't just drop a camera anywhere. The other requirement is these things have to be advertised prior to us putting a camera there. We, as of 2018, we had 325 approved advertised locations where we could put cameras. And so you're aware, I have 39 cameras to rotate amongst those over 300 sites. So we had some requests. We had verified them as legitimate sites, and we needed to advertise them. So what myself and my staff did is we looked at the county, quite frankly, as a whole, and we tried to anticipate locations we would potentially go in the future based on development out in Clarksburg, based on some other locations where we get requests for. And we advertised a whole lot of places. We expanded our speed corridors and advertised additional blocks along the corridors. We looked at the heat maps for Vision Zero, and we went to some of those places that are not commercial. And we advertised these locations in advance. And it cost over $10,000 for us to do this in the Washington Post because it's the only newspaper of general circulation pretty much still in existence around here. So it was an exhaustive process, and we are getting a lot of requests for places that we would never anticipate going. Small little roads like Horner's Lane, roads you maybe never have even heard of. I'm looking at my list now, and there's roads. I'm not from here. There's roads I've never heard of. Lockberry Street, Kavanaugh Drive. These are places we've never evaluated, we've never advertised, and we've never done anything with these locations prior to COVID. We never expected we would get these kinds of requests. The reduction in traffic has created the ability for cars to move faster. The bad thing about traffic is it slows you down, right? Everyone wants to get to where they're going. The good thing about traffic is it naturally slows traffic down. So with the lack of volume, we saw a huge increase in speeds. As the chief mentioned, we were getting speeds regularly over 100 miles an hour. We have corrected that. We have relocated our cameras to these high-speed places that we have discovered, and we are not seeing those high speeds like we did initially. Traffic is somewhat getting back to more normal traffic patterns. And we have been doing this. We have not missed a day since COVID started. We have been consistently out there doing traffic since the pandemic started. And quite frankly, we've probably been on sometimes the only thing in the county out there doing traffic. So we have been focusing on these high volume roadways, high volume in the pandemic world, high volume roadways to address those significantly high and extremely dangerous speeds. So some of these requests that we have gotten, they've been put on the back burner a little bit because, quite frankly, the risk of fatality on these roads is extremely low. Other roads where we're seeing speeds in the 80s, the 90s, those are fatalities waiting to happen. And from my perspective, and I don't think anybody would disagree with me, that's my responsibility to determine those locations and go there and prevent these fatalities from happening. So I'm sure there's some frustration out there from some citizens that, live in these little residential neighborhoods that we haven't plopped a camera down there. I get that. I feel I have an obligation to prevent injury and fatalities first.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Hetherington. We appreciate all that you are doing.
To move this along, Mr. President, we're going to go through the last slides pretty quickly because I'm sure people have questions.
They do, including me. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. We are going to be responsive. We are looking at other technologies to use in residential neighborhoods, the speed boards, and we talked about some of the speed cameras to work with the officers. So when we go to the next step, we will be responsive to the community as much as we are able to then focus on the major arterials, as Mr. Hetherington talked. Next slide. This slide will basically show during COVID period, we were still issuing thousands of citations to drivers. So as Mr. Hetherington's point, yes, we've been active for years. The next slide. When I took over the program in 2006, I guaranteed then Phil Andrews, who was the chair of the Public Safety Committee, two things. One, the program would be self-sustaining. The second, it would be well-managed. We've lived up to both ends of it. You will see we used to issue approximately 500,000 citations a year, and now we're working down to 355,000. This is primarily due to the fact that we have not expanded the program for a couple of years near the end of the contract. When we get the new number of cameras that come in, we get to double the program, and you'll see that the number of citations in violations will increase. The same thing with red light. You'll see the numbers have gone down. There are numerous red light locations that I know are very valid that we have not been able to install for a couple of years. We will get them out there, and what I've been told and seen and which supported by Wade is red light cameras even support pedestrian safety. So we will look at that as well. Next. As you can see, one of the questions that came up is how efficient is our speed light and red light cameras? And what we have is we look at the number of rejects that are occurred. Some of those rejects are out of anybody's control, but the ones that are in control of the vendor that should have turned into citations, we do manage that program as well. And of the issuable events, we issue about 95% of the possible violations for speed and approximately 90% of the violations for red light. So our program is very effective and efficient. Mr. Hetherington meets with the vendor every week and ensures that they do the job they're supposed to do. Next. One of the questions that came up is talking about equipment repair orders. What a lot of people don't understand is Maryland, unlike many other states, does not have an annual inspection program. So the police officers are the enforcement tool for the state to ensure that vehicles in need of repair, cracked windshields, modified mufflers, adjusted suspensions, missing windshield wipers, mirrors, lights. And we do this by issuing what's called a service equipment repair order. This is a no-fine document. This requires people to get their car repaired and show certification at any of the registered gas stations or locations. And if they do so, there's no sanctions or penalty. If they fail to do so, Maryland suspends their registration. We recognize the fact that, some of these violations or some of these equipment repairs happen, and people just don't have money to pay for it. However, if you don't repair your cracked windshield and a rock hits your windshield, it'll go through the windshield and kill you. So we do this. You saw we do approximately 12,000 at most a year. It's not a high number of our violations, but it's something that we must do as officers to support the state program. If the state decided to come up with an annual inspection program, we would just then enforce those people that don't get their inspection. We could enforce equipment repair orders, but essentially would change the dynamic, but that's out of our control. So officers will and are required to do equipment violations. We want them to focus on the more serious ones moving forward, but it is something that will do or primarily be done during patrol officers as the regular course of business. Next. And now I'm going to bring in a lot of questions came up about pretext stops and traffic stops. I've asked Captain Kokinos to come in. He oversees our police training, and he can talk about the training more specifically, what we do train, what we don't train. But one of the things I want to say for the record is the police department does not support discrimination in any form, racial profiling. It is unacceptable, it is illegal, it is unethical, and is not supported in the department by our policy, by our principle, and by our conduct. Captain Kokinos?
Good morning. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. Excellent. Thank you, Mr. President. Captain Kokinos from the Training and Education Division. Try to move through this at a reasonable pace because I know we want to move on to the questions. There's two things I want to start with. One, pretext traffic stops are not racial profiling. And that is something that's a discussion out in the nation. It's worth the discussion in education and working through that issue. I'm going to briefly explain what a pretext traffic stop is and provide two examples before we move on to another topic. So just a real brief start. Everybody has a protection under the U.S. Constitution under the Fourth Amendment of an unreasonable search and seizure. These pretext stops, where this came from was a U.S. Supreme Court case in 1996 called Wren, W-H-R-E-N. This was a unanimous Supreme Court 9-0 decision that basically regulated through case law how a pretext stop is lawful and how it has to be done. Furthermore, in the state of Maryland, out of our Court of Appeals and Special Appeals, there have been numerous cases involving traffic stops and the Fourth Amendment and things of that nature. There is a very tight rule book on these type of stops. And basically what a pretext stop is that an officer observes activity or has suspicions that that officer wants to investigate, but you need to have a legal reason to stop someone in a motor vehicle. So a traffic violation will be observed. The officer is stopping the person for the traffic violation. That needs to take place. There needs to be working on the business of that traffic violation, but simultaneously they're allowed to explore without delaying the stop their suspicions. And the next slide will, I guess, give some examples here real quick. Well, I think that's a little bit later, but before we get to the two examples, I'll start with regards to these type of stops. So racial profiling is strictly prohibited in the department. There's two rules. One is Function Code 300, Rule 26. These are available to the public, and that describes in detail that we are not permitted to do enforcement based on someone's race. We are not allowed to discriminate against people's protected classes, race, gender, age, etc. Also, we have Headquarters Memorandum 1402, which speaks specifically to race-based stops. We do not teach, nor have we ever, officers conduct stops based on someone's race or other protected class. We teach officers constitutional policing. We teach officers legal and lawful traffic stops and how to operate not only within the Constitution, but within Maryland state's case law and things out of our courts. We teach that you have to have a violation, traffic violation, to conduct a traffic stop of a person. And we also teach, we have enhanced our training this year where we put more emphasis on racial profiling and enforcement of regards to those things, and reiterating our strong policies on that. We have infused additional de-escalation training into traffic stops, additional training with regards to professionalism. And I believe, and we teach, that a traffic stop can be a positive community engagement. It can be, we issue a lot of warnings, as you've heard earlier. A warning with some education, with a good discussion, can leave a person who's been pulled over with hopefully a positive interaction with an officer. We do not tolerate, nor is it permitted, that officers are rude or not treating someone with respect and dignity. If that happens, there is a process to file complaints, and those officers will be investigated, and if found to be acting inappropriately, handled through the discipline process. But we teach officers that they must be professional, not to argue with people, not to be rude. All of our traffic stops with our uniformed personnel are captured on body camera, and many officers also have in-car video. We use those to obviously be able to document the stops, and it helps with transparency and things of that nature. Next slide, please. So two examples real quick, and then I'll move on, is a pretext stop. So we have a situation, let's say an officer is on northbound Wisconsin Avenue leaving Bethesda, bar and restaurant district, 1 a.m. on a Saturday morning. The officer observes a vehicle swerving within its lane. So the officer is suspicious that this person may be impaired, may be under the influence of alcohol, could be a danger to the public. The officer notices that the vehicle has a brake light out. So the officer conducts a traffic stop. The officer is conducting a traffic stop for the equipment violation of having a brake light out, but also is suspicious that this person may be under the influence of alcohol or drugs. The officer is not going to wait for the person to crash into another vehicle or crash in a solo vehicle collision, which could result in death or serious injury. they're going to use that traffic violation to make a stop to investigate the sobriety of the individual. Next slide, please. Another example, which, theft from autos, a lot of victims in our county, a huge crime trend, cars getting broken into. An officer is out proactively working in her beat, knows that there's been a number of theft from autos in a particular neighborhood. Our neighbors have ring cameras. A white SUV has been seen with some of these thefts. One night, the officer is in this high theft from auto area and sees a white SUV driving away from the neighborhood. The officer notices a traffic violation. The license plate is missing, not being displayed. So the officer makes the stop for the violation, but is also at the same time keeping an eye open to see if this person or subjects in the vehicle may be involved with this theft from auto ring. So the traffic violation is used, and it's simultaneous with keeping an eye and doing police work to try to bring closure to our victims. So those are just two examples of many. There's a lot of other things that go into it with investigations and things of that nature, but it is not done loosely, if you will. There is regulation, there is legal standards that have to be met. And next slide, please. And that's all I got. I'll be here for questions, and I appreciate your time.
In closing and summary, traffic enforcement's primary responsibility is traffic safety. 20,000 crashes, 30 people so far this year have lost their life. Thousands and thousands more will be permanently injured. In all 20,000 crashes, people are traumatized. Traffic is dangerous. It's dangerous for everybody in the roadway, let alone police officers, and doing enforcement is a dangerous job. Automated enforcement is a national model and is very effective, and we're working on advancing it through a hybrid model to be even more responsive, more effective, and more supportive. And finally, the police department does not condone racial profiling by recognizing that perceptions are reality, and we have to be mindful of that and continue to work, train, and work forward to that. But please rest assured, Chief Jones will hold people accountable if we identify any means of racial profiling or inappropriate conduct. And with that, thank you for letting me talk about traffic. You know how much I love traffic, and we open the floor for questions.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you all panelists for giving us the truly fine information that you gave us today. I think you've pretty much touched on all of the topics, but or the questions. But one question that I guess we can go back to either Captain McBain or the Chief Didone. You discussed the reorganization and the possibilities of it. And is there a timeline for that?
There is. We wanted to move forward, but when we were going to move forward July 1st, as a matter of fact. Chief Jones saw the need to do this, especially when after COVID, we saw the problems on our roadways, and we wanted to refocus our efforts and get it in the Vision Zero model, which is clearly what it's supported. However, when the county executive decided to impanel the reimagined police work, he asked Chief Jones to hold off on it to see if there was any feedback or any information that came back from the reimagined committee. We are working internally to have Captain McBain work more collectively with the district commanders to try to get this enforced unofficially until then, but we would already be there. We'd be already moving forward. And one, I think the comprehensive thing about this reorganization is it's data driven. When Ms. Navarro wants to know what was done on Georgia Avenue, Captain McBain would be able to provide that to you within hours. Right now, we have to wait for ETICs to come in. We have to contact the district commanders. We're just not effective when we divided and conquered ourselves. We want to put this on the same page so we can get more responsive. and then we want to coordinate the selective enforcement complaints so they're all handled the same way at the districts. Each district does them differently. Ms. Jones may complain about a stop sign. Officers may have worked it 42 times and never saw a violation. We need to get feedback to Ms. Jones that we're closing it at this point, and we'll come back in 6 months and see if it's changed. We just don't manage it really well in communication back to the community. And with the central plan, we will put together a central database. They'll be put in. Patrol officers will be assigned tasks. So we'll be doing this enforcement in the evenings as well, not just primarily the day work. So I think the whole system will be there. I'd love to get it started. I'd love to have 20 extra officers to really ramp it up and really push forward. But, you know, we're in the setup and hold stage.
Okay. And we hear you, and we appreciate that. Does the department track which traffic stops are pretextual? And how often do those lead to arrest? Do you actually have data on that?
We use ETICS. In the ETICS model, there's only categories for when you stop somebody and you can search somebody when you're searching vehicles. Pretext is a state of mind, and there's not a category to capture. So the answer is no, we don't have it. I want to say the numbers are very small. When you look at the number of searches and the number of traffic stops, it's point something. It's less than 1%. I'm not thinking it's more, but you know, when John Romack's making a DUI and he sees the guy weaving, he doesn't want to wait for him to cross the center line and kill somebody, so he pulls him over. I don't know how many pretext stops John Romack has done for that. So the answer is no, we don't know. It's kind of reporting a state of mind. But I can tell you it's not a high number because most of us, 80% are done by patrol officers, and they're basically, they see a violation, they make a stop between things. So,
okay. And then my last question is, and I know in addition to, let me say it this way, in addition to the reorganization that you've discussed, are there any additional resources that you need from us to be helpful in traffic enforcement?
Yes, and I'll say that.
I had a feeling you were going to say that, Chief.
Absolutely. You know me, I've never been shy. The council,
I knew that.
The council has been the traffic champion for the 10 years that I was the traffic director. You know, I'll just be very blunt. You all have cared more about traffic than probably anybody else I've ever dealt with, and you've always been there for us. So we're very, very heartfelt and very appreciative. One of the areas we would like to go forward in is, you know, these speed boards where they have. What we want to do is we want to integrate technology more into our enforcement and our Vision Zero program. These speed boards are about $5,000 a pop. But what it allows us to do is to go into some of the neighborhoods in the community where there's an allegation of speeding. And instead of assigning an officer to monitor periodically, which is not scientific, it's really absurd the way we do it, but it's the only way we did it. We want to put these boards in there, and then when they're turned off, they're actually capturing data. And then we're able to look at the data to find out if there's a meaningful problem, what is the exact speeding going on, and if there's a problem, it might be between 12 and 1. And then we would assign an officer out there from 12 and 1. We need to get many of these boards so we can go out and service these complaints and do a better job for our community. And also, then once we got the data, we turn on the boards to slow people down. And the studies show it only has a short-term effect. But if we're moving these boards around like we are speed cameras, we've just double and triple multiplied the speed camera program, right? Nobody gets a ticket. It's voluntary compliance. The citizens see it. They get the reinforced in that neighborhood where Mr. Hethering's talking about. The speed board would be the solution for that neighborhood road on a cul-de-sac. So that's the one thing that really jumps up. Wade Holland is going to talk about moving Vision Zero forward. We're in partnership with there. If you can support Vision Zero, you'll be supporting us, and we're supporting everybody. That's the big plan. And we need to get Vision Zero back on the mindset of everybody. 2021, we got to survive the pedestrian season, the daylight saving change next week. I'm just scared to death how many more pedestrians we're going to lose. But in 2021, we really need to kick Vision Zero back in the butt and let's get it going. Resources we need, using technology, working smarter, not harder, and getting all hands back on deck.
Thank you. Ms. Councilmember Navarro, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this presentation. And there's a lot to process. And, I keep thinking about the fact that the pandemic has altered so many different things, so many different sort of patterns of behavior. This is definitely one of them. And as it was stated earlier, it was kind of counterintuitive because in some ways we thought, okay, if everybody's staying home, if everybody's teleworking, et cetera, this should not be such an issue. It seemed like it was kind of the opposite in terms of, I don't know if people were also trying to just let off steam, just feeling cooped up, just, all of those elements. But unfortunately, it just kind of, became more of a usual pattern than what it should have been. So I really appreciate hearing the different thoughts that you and different proposals that you are considering. The centralization, I think it's going to be an important one. And also having then these particular officers, more in tune with what's happening in the district at the same time is critical. We have these neighborhood action teams that, that the council sort of activated and finally codified through legislation, working so closely with the regional services directors. And I just want to offer that in whatever deliberation, whatever has taken place regarding the reorganization, that these neighborhood action teams in partnership with the regional services directors, that they also play a role, because I think that's another really great way to get to the issues that may be happening in the neighborhoods, many of them which have become now sort of, again, a pattern, right? Because sometimes you may have some issues that are just very temporary, yet we know that in some areas, a lot of areas, the neighborhoods, they've just become patterns. And so the more that we can work with whatever assets we already have positioned in the community, with our regional services directors, with these, neighborhood action teams, with now this reorganization, it provides, I think, a pretty good complement to address a lot of those issues. I appreciate Chief Didone talking about, those boards. I think that is something that the council definitely should look into in finding, ways to fund those. I think, again, it's a nice complement to this, reorganization. It is a frustration that, that many of us feel. I mean, I live in right on a neighborhood road that is kind of like an arterial now. And even though they have speed bumps, we've had the boards at times, and you can tell that, people kind of pay attention. But just like in so many other neighborhoods, I think that would be, a very, very important. I wanted to also just mention to Chairman Katz as well that, we may want to consider some type of letter to our state highway administration partners, just in terms of resources, et cetera, and enforcements and some of the state roads and highways, the ICC, et cetera, because I know that that's also become an issue, and that's a little bit outside of the purview of our police department. Lastly, in terms of the, I think the conversation about the pretextual stops, I appreciated the description of how the training is handled regarding this particular item, but I think there should be a nexus to figuring out how we can report that data, because even though it's somewhat subjective, I think that's that's the crux of the issue, that so many people feel there's the perception that it can lead to racial profiling. And so if we're able to capture the data, just like the two examples that were, that were shared, we will be able to best understand that, look, in these instances, this is very critical, because then it leads to lives saved. But He's
Your
my
canine
daughter.
group
I'm
is there.
babysitting my daughter's 9-month-old dog while she had to travel. But anyway, I feel like, that would be useful, just so that we can have as much data as possible. And lastly, so excited with Vision Zero. You're absolutely right, Chief Duggan. We have to just get back on track with this. It's so connected to all the things that we're talking about. But please let us know what we can do to I guess, strengthen the resources, because the issue of the drag racing, et cetera, even though it's kind of separate from the ongoing traffic enforcement issues in terms of speeding, if there's anything that we can do to address that, because I am worried that it's becoming more of just a matter of, routine versus just kind of like a one-off, and don't know the exact results of the investigation, but that one horrible accident, I believe it was Muddy Branch, et cetera, there was a lot of social media reports, folks on Instagram, et cetera, just overtly talking about, drag racing, and I think even prices, et cetera, and how that was one of those kinds of situations, which was just tragic. And so therefore, I do think that we need to figure out a way to, to be more responsive and let our community know that we're cracking down on this, because it's very much connected to Vision Zero, it's very much connected to, to all of these challenges. So I really appreciate it. I think, I think there is interest with other council members that would maybe have a follow-up, maybe session, council session, just kind of talking about all these things that are happening. So we may want to think about that. And I hope that even though the Reimagining Police Task Force is such an important endeavor, we do need to address these issues. We can't wait for that to happen. So I'm glad to hear that some of the reorganization is informally already happening, because I think that is going to be super helpful. Yes, I thought, was it Captain McBain that wanted to say something?
Yeah, so I don't want to cut you off, but I can actually address a few of your topics that you brought up, and I'll just go down them real quick. As far as your community action teams that you have in your neighborhoods that you've designed, the community complaint officers, the traffic officers that we're going to leave at the district stations, that is going to be their focus, is to work with the community. And it's just not that officer. That officer is going to be tasked with coming up with a plan. That plan might be utilizing an entire shift, or at least going to a 6 to 4 shift, or a 3 to 1 shift, or a midnight shift, and just giving the guidance. It's not, I wanted to make sure I was clear. It's just not the 1 or 2 officers we're leaving doing the enforcement. They're just facilitating how we're going to do that. So those teams that you've created that in your neighborhoods, they're going to have a pipeline right to them to address any issues they have. And then I got to give credit where credit's due. As far as State Highway Administration is concerned, when we went into COVID, we had a lot of Maryland Highway Safety Office grant funding. As a result, we didn't use it and it was tens of thousands of dollars, because one, Highway Safety Office shut down the funding because we were limiting our traffic stops. But then I filed modifications for our grant, and instead of using it for enforcement, I was able to buy stuff, and I was the Highway Safety Office purchased a $16,000 VMS board that also does radar speed enforcement. So it's multitasking. We can send out a message of slow down, but also capture the information. And then we did a checkpoint, DUI checkpoint in October. And so the one thing that I had a big concern was, how am I going to ask my officers to stick their faces in these cars to smell an alcoholic beverage in the height of COVID? And the Highway Safety Office purchased Montgomery County 6 passive alcohol sensors. and basically it's a device. It does not eliminate the officer's responsibility to develop reasonable suspicion or probable cause, but it indicated whether there was ambient alcohol in the area, so that the officer, instead of basically it's described as an extension of the officer's nose. So it just says to the officer, hey, alcohol's around here. We might want to take this person off, put them through some tests, and see if we have probable cause to arrest them. So Highway Safety Office really stepped up and funded a lot of these devices that we've been able to put into our program. And then also, real quick, you mentioned the Muddy Branch wreck. Just to be clear, yes, there's a lot of chatter about that young lady being a participant in these car group families, or like these rallies, and it's kind of like a cult. It's something they all do together. She was a participant, but there's just no indication, and I want to just be clear, that there was any type of race going on at that time. That, unfortunately, was a young lady that got her hands on a very brand new, highly modified car, and that needs to be addressed. And then finally, I'll just touch on the last thing, and that's what we're going to do about the speed races and the car rallies and the high speeds. So with our newest round of funding from the Maryland Highway Safety Office, part of that funding is aggressive speed enforcement. Well, you have to use that funding at certain times of the year that the state prescribes. Well, what I did was I filed another modification. I basically said we have a very bad issue of high-speed vehicles in the middle of the night. Specifically, I've targeted the hours of 10 p.m. to 3 in the morning. And that's consistent with the fatal collisions that we've been seeing. And so I was able to get an additional $10,000 from Highway Safety Office, and then I modified and moved funding from the other aggressive fundings. So I have a pot of $14,000 that we're implementing in November and December right away. And so specifically, we're going to target Friday and Saturday nights from 10 p.m. to 3 in the morning, sporadically throughout the county in all 6 districts. So in all 6 districts, I worked with our analysts. I came up with 2 locations per district that are on major arterial roadways where we have the potential to see collisions due to speed. So that's something we're doing. But then also we are pushing out a plan, and it really causes the commanders to really get on board with their midnight officers, that when they do have the downtime of not running calls, they need to get out in pairs and conduct LiDAR enforcement on their major arterial roadways. So I think by doing those things and deploying our DCATs and our alcohol initiative section in certain locations of the county, we're going to be able to, that is a response to that. And I think when we put those resources out there and invest the money wisely, I think we're going to see a reduction, not only because of the issuance of citations, but our mere presence on the major arterial roadways throughout the morning. We'll be able to heavy it up and have more resources out there. So I hope that addressed your issues.
Thank you.
It does. I really appreciate that. I just wanted to just circle back on the community, the neighborhood action teams. And the reference I was making was that these neighborhood action teams actually were established so that the regional services director, working with whatever department of relevance, could address some chronic issues happening in their in their area of jurisdiction. And so it seemed to me that with your reorganization, that would be a really powerful way to connect with them, because it gives you additional capacity to address the neighborhood specific issues that then can be, raised on a department level. So I just wanted to flag that, because I think it's a great model that it's going to complement your reorganization very nicely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Albornoz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Councilmember Navarro, for requesting this session. I think this has been extraordinarily productive. I've learned a lot here. We've crossed into a number of different key areas. I want to start with the drag racing, and we had gotten a little bit of a snippet in the last briefing with the preview on this, and I appreciate the transparency, Assistant Chief Didone, acknowledging that this was not something we expected, but it has occurred and it continues, which obviously is alarming, despite the efforts that we've taken to date to enhance enforcement. This is shifting to different neighborhoods and is proving to be something very complicated to address, as we heard and as you have spoken to about during the session. Wanted to clarify one thing. Understandably, in the beginning of the pandemic, we scaled back some of our patrols because of concerns over transmission related to the virus. And as we were learning more about the virus, clearly we needed to be cautious in all levels. But to confirm, are we back to where we were prior to the pandemic in terms of general patrols and dispatching officers within respective regions, or is there still on some level a holding back in light of the pandemic and where we are now?
We, as far as patrol and response for service, we are back having officers respond into routine patrols and patrol-related events. We are having telework with a lot of our detective and our investigative. Our CSOs, they work part-time. We are evolving the department back to a full cycle, and I expect by 2021 we will be. I would be non-transparent and remiss if I did not tell you it is difficult for us to get our officers to re-engage in traffic. To be honest with you, the concerns about pretextual stops and concerns on racial profiling in the community, without the voice of Vision Zero, has them afraid to engage. We had officers that always did traffic stops. If you look at the numbers, they're down, and they're afraid to engage, to be quite blunt and frank. We are working on this to get officers to back engage for safety. The deaths are increasing. The traffic volumes are up there. These problems are existing. We have to do our jobs, but it would really help if from the council we heard more about Vision Zero and less about the concerns about the racial profiling. We want to move it forward. I've been the poster child of professional traffic stops. We're even working in that vision and with the expectation as well. So we're working it from multiple levels, but we just need the community to know. They need to know the community is behind them, their council's behind them, and I think we'll get them back and engage. We hear everybody quite clearly. We understand we're under a microscope, but I think we will shine and we will continue to show forward. 120,000 traffic stops on an annual basis. If there is a problem in the police department, it's a very small number, but we're losing the majority because they're all worried about the small amount.
Well, I think it's important to have this discussion. I appreciate you saying that. Obviously, there are a lot of layers to this discussion, and I think this reimagining committee and the efforts of the Citizens Advisory Board that have been stood up by the council are an effort to try and build a bridge. But it sort of reinforces the recommendation that was made back in July about the consolidation of the various traffic components, because we need data. And if we don't have a sufficient number of data, inferences can be made, which are quite understandable, without additional data to dig deeper into speaking to the complexities of the issues that MCPD is trying to address. And so I do think that we need to get back on track. And if there are components that we can push forward prior to the completion of that analysis, I think we should. One thing that I think there's universal agreement on, and public sentiment has shifted significantly on this, are traffic cameras and red light cameras. People don't love getting them in the mail, but I think there's an acknowledgement that they work, and that is very clear. And it's only since I have been a member of the Public Safety Committee that I have come to better understand why we don't have more of them, the restrictions at the state level on where they can be placed. And because of that shift in public sentiment, to Councilmember Navarro's point, I absolutely agree that we should be working with our delegation aggressively to see what we can do at the state level, and whether it's a local bill to push this forward. I think it makes sense for us to do this. I have to give a lot of credit to a number of our colleagues in the legislature, in particular Al Carr, who has been working a lot on these traffic safety issues and has been a leader in this space. And I think that we need to push the envelope on that. Three more quick questions, just again on the drag racing. I know we have stepped up enforcement, acknowledging some of the concern overall about general traffic enforcement, but on this specific issue, I noticed in the report that we've stepped up traffic enforcement on Georgia Avenue and Veers Mill. University Boulevard is not mentioned though, and some other areas where we have known there has been an increase. Has there been additional support placed in other areas beyond what was just in the report? And could you describe briefly what that additional support looks like?
Okay, I can answer that. And this is an example of the issue. Councilmember Navarro question on Georgia Avenue is the 4th District. Majority of University Boulevard is the 3rd District. The 3rd District is more focused on crime, less focused on traffic. So the response from the traffic squad in the 3rd District has not been to the same level of expectation of in the 4th District. That's why we need to do the reorganization, because each district commander directs their traffic squad, and the issues that Captain McBain has sent out to the districts are not all uniformly fallen. So being very transparent, we have less response from the 3rd District traffic squad than we do the 4th District. And that's why we're trying these different methods to get to uniformity, because then we would have consistency on these major arterials. We are looking at expanding automated enforcement onto University Boulevard in the areas that we are. I know Councilmember Hucker will be well on top of this subject. But the one thing that I will say is we have to be cautious on how we go forward with automated enforcement changes, because once again, I will tell you, the rest of the state wants to get rid of our residential road restriction rather than let us expand and do other things. So working with Melanie Winger and Sarah Morningstar, they have always preached caution, because with our intent to lower the threshold, expand the speed limit, or make any modifications, it's a double-edged sword. You could equally lose this ability, which would then be devastating to our efforts today. So I just throw that out there as measure. You all know the environment much better than me, but that's the caution that I will give you on that one. And one other thing real quick.
Go ahead.
Because it goes to your point and Councilmember Navarro's reference data tracking on pretext stops. Our ETICS program is a state program. We have no ability to monitor and track that. If working with the state, the delegation and state, you can get those fields added, that's fine. But another thing that's not added is race when it comes to traffic crashes. And we do not get race information back on your driver's license. You don't have race anymore. So the state is kind of pulled away from providing the information that everybody wants. And if we had race on traffic crashes, I could compare the amount of racial demographics to traffic crashes, which is a more appropriate baseline to look at to deal with traffic violations. So I understand data very well. It's just something that we're going to have to work with the state and through the delegation, which if you get the data and into the state programs, then we will all use it.
I appreciate that. The other thought I had, and this I'm sure is an oversimplification, but I've seen the command center where we've got all the videos that have the various intersections in the county that we use for traffic, just, to preempt, and that times the lights. Is there any way to access those? Do we access those in the evenings, as some of these drag races are occurring? And is that helpful?
Can I jump in on this one real quick for a second, please? To your question just now, those are monitoring cameras. They don't record. So
Okay.
unless somebody's there actively watching them, it's not recorded video. The light timing isn't necessarily controlled by those. Those are just to monitor traffic. Two quick things that have come up that I didn't touch on before that I just wanted to. There was some discussion about state highway. When we put a speed camera on a road that is a state road, they have to approve our permit. When we put a red light camera in an intersection that involves a state road, they have to approve our permit request. We've had some significant issues in working with state highway when it comes to red light enforcement. They are against it. They don't support it. They take extended periods of time to approve our permit requests. And most recently, our vendor has hired a third party, I hate to use the word lobbyist, but they advocate on behalf of our vendor in the construction process of new red light cameras. State Highway is now only issuing us a permit if we do not conduct right turn on red enforcement, which is a standard that we've been doing since the inception. And when we start talking about pedestrian enforcement, right turn on reds is huge because, as you can all imagine, you come to an intersection, you want to make a right on red, you look to your left because they have a green light, and you fail to look to the right where the pedestrians are crossing. So you get up to the red light, you're rolling through the red light, you make a right, and you look forward, and there's a pedestrian right in front of you. We strongly believe and are advocating to be allowed to do right turn on red enforcement, and state highway is not allowing it. So we have these intersections where we would love to do enforcement. They're restricting our ability to do it the way that we want to do it. Our position is that they're merely approving a construction permit, more or less, allowing us to put up a pole in their right of way to do enforcement. They're dictating the method in which we decide to conduct the enforcement. This has been going on for years. It's getting worse. So to the chief's point, we may need to all come together and kind of gang up on state highway a little bit, to be perfectly frank.
Mr. Chairman, I think that'd be a good follow-up session to bring representatives from state highway. But
Yeah, we can do that.
And my last point is, because this has come up in the past, and I would like you as a body to be aware of this. We have a policy where when a speed limit is reduced on a roadway, like recently a section of River Road and a couple other places, we have an internal policy here that we will not put a camera there for 12 to 18 months after the speed limit is reduced. One of the biggest complaints, if you will, that we get is that this is a money grab. We're organizing speed traps. If we were to jump into a place the day after the speed limit is reduced, it just fulfills that thought. So we give 12 to 18 months for traffic to adjust to the new speed, people to get acclimated to the new speed before we will conduct enforcement here. So as I mentioned earlier, we get these requests for cameras. Someone were like, oh, we thought it was a speed problem before. Now it's 25, not 35. They're really speeding. In some instances, what we found is when we've done the studies is the speed of the vehicles hasn't changed at all. It was 35. The 85th percentile was 40. The traffic's still doing 40, even with the reduction of the speed limit. We will eventually potentially get there from an enforcement standpoint, but we just add fuel to the fire if we jump in there right away. So we have this policy where we wait a generous amount of time to get everyone acclimated.
Thank you.
Totally understand that those aren't recorded cameras, but in an effort to expand the reach of, and it sounds like some districts don't have quite the capacity. If there is a resource issue, if there is an opportunity to have somebody who'd be responsible for observing and watching those cameras on those Fridays and Saturday nights in those areas that we can't provide additional direct support with boots on the ground. Again, if this is a cost and resource issue, and I am totally supportive of the speed boards, let us know, because this council has not been bashful in appropriating funds on an emergency basis. And I think this rises to that level, as has been articulated, because it's a problem that persists. And so if we can access existing technology in a creative way, let's do it. And so I think that's important. And then I guess just my final point is, obviously we're going to have more conversations. And I know that there is some consideration being given to transferring some components of traffic to a separate department within county government. I think not just this session, but for a variety of reasons, I have a lot of questions and concerns that I know a number of my colleagues share that will need to be answered before we firmly go in that direction. I would hate to try and solve one problem, create many more by trying to solve an issue that may be able to be addressed through the bridges I mentioned before that we're trying to build, through the communication and partnerships and alliances, through the community policing that everyone acknowledges, including MCPD, needs to be stepped up. But I think we just need to be very careful as we look at some of these solutions in this very charged environment that sometimes it feels like you could light a match and will explode. And so we have to follow data. We have to follow what is the actual information that's going on within communities, and just be very thoughtful and deliberative and cautious in how we approach these and many more conversations in this space. So thank you very much, Assistant Chief Joan, and to all of your colleagues. I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Vice President Hopper.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Chair. Be patient with me. I have a long, messy list of questions and follow-up questions now. We've learned a lot. Thank you first to Councilmember Navarro for requesting this and the chair for convening it. We learned a lot today, although some areas I wish we had more information going in. Thanks again to Susan for the packet. So we talked a lot about the importance of data. I thought we were talking today about the response to the traffic enforcement picture in 2020, particularly pre and post COVID. Slide 3 ends at 2019. Slide 4 ends at 2018. Can we get the 2020 data, and can we get it month by month so we can see what enforcement looks like before COVID, the pandemic, and during the pandemic?
Yes.
So how come it's not here?
Because it's relatively incomplete and very small. There's very few traffic stops, and the numbers are not more or less proportional to the COVID.
I thought we began by saying enforcement has been increased.
I thought automated enforcement has, but officers, as I told you before, are very reluctant to engage. When COVID started, they essentially minimized all traffic stops except for those that were super critical and life-threatening. And as we have been evolving, we brought the motor officers back at the end of August, and then we are now trying to get them engaging and doing the enforcement starting in September and October. So I can get the data for you, as I said, yes, but I will tell you the data will show a dramatic drop from March till September, and then slowly start to trickle up.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it would have been good to have that for this hearing, but how soon do you think we can get that?
Captain McBain worked with Mr. Lohr and see if we can get it in a week.
Thank you. Isn't it possible or even likely that if we've allowed our officers to stop doing routine traffic stops, that is one of the drivers for increased reckless driving and speeding?
Yes, absolutely. As I said, the lower volume on the road and the low visibility of officers. Yes, sir.
But you don't have the ability to tell officers to maintain their volume of traffic stops?
We can direct officers to do so, but what officers do, you can't tell them they have to conduct enforcement. You can't give them quotas, and you give them the expectations but no, you can't make them conduct traffic stops.
So they're on the street as many hours as pre-COVID. They just are not stopping speeders and reckless drivers.
Correct. Initially, when COVID hit, they were given direction to limit their traffic stops and their exposures to only very serious violations.
They were given direction?
Those officers weren't doing a lot to start with, and they've done exactly nothing after that.
So they scaled back out of their concern, their own
The
the number
department's
of.
concerned.
Pardon me?
Initially, the department gave them direction. Right. And
Okay.
then we took the traffic officers and we detailed them to admin leave in the backup. So the traffic officers were not even working full time on the roadway. They were the support should the patrol officers become sick with COVID. They were the reinforcements. So for
Okay.
several months, our traffic officers were not even out on the roadway.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I think we'll get a lot of concerns about that. On the proposed centralization we talked about, I'm glad to hear you, Chief, acknowledge sometimes poor communication back from the department to residents is often a problem. I was told that the proposed centralization of enforcement is very unpopular with the rank and file that already has concerns about morale. So is that really a concern or not?
I think a lot of the traffic officers are concerned about the centralization because there's a mandate that a percentage of them work evenings, and they all like to work day work. So yes, there is a concern that they will also be held accountable. As you just heard in the report, the difference between the 3rd district and the 4th district was the fact that the officers chose to engage in the 4th district, but they chose not to engage in the 3rd district. So the idea is officers over the years have become quite comfortable in managing their own time and resource. So yes, there is a morale issue that they do not want to be held accountable, and they do not want to be given a central direction that may be contrary to what they want to do. Yes, sir.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate the candor. So yeah, you raised it again. I was going to get to that, but I think from the perception of probably us and much of the public, the expectation is that the department can walk and chew gum at the same time and can enforce traffic laws and can focus on crime. Traffic laws are one form of crime, and everybody is charged with enforcing them, as you began at the beginning. So I think it's going to be a surprise to a lot of our viewers that in the 3rd district, they're less concerned about traffic enforcement, because they're more concerned about crime, and the opposite in the 4th district. But that's what you're.
Well, I talked about with the traffic officers. The traffic officers were more engaging in the 4th district at the direction of the commander, more responsive. The 3rd district, not as much.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Let me ask about automated enforcement that you brought up. How many civilian employees are in that unit?
I remember when we started the program, there were 28 civilian employees. I do not know what the head count is right now. Mr. Hetherington will have to advise it.
I have 24.
Thank you. And what are the responsibilities carried out by sworn officers that could not, due to state law, be carried out by civilians?
So we have approximately in both our field operations and our administrative staff, we have about 30 civilians. Speed violations are required to be completely finalized by a sworn officer. We have an officer assigned to our unit to do that final sign off and review. Red light and school bus, which is something we haven't talked about.
Right.
School bus enforcement, had we had a full school year this last current school year, we would have had over 80,000 school bus violations, which is horrifying.
Yeah.
That is a workload that was added to our unit with no real manpower addition, so we've taken that on as well. They're required only to be approved by civilian review, as is red light violations. So we have staff that in our field office that go out in the vans that you see out there occasionally. They staff those. They do the remote startups of our fixed poles in the garage. And we have our more administrative staff here at headquarters that do the citation review, customer service, court preparation, transfers of liability, things like that.
Thank you. That's very helpful. So you need, it sounds like, more civilians to review school bus and red light camera violations.
We need civilian and sworn, civilian to do the two-step review
Yes.
for that. And then when we double the program, we'll need more officers to approve the speed citations.
Great. And you'll,
That plan for more staff has already been submitted and approved pending funding. We know what the situation is currently.
approved by the county exec's office and pending funding by us?
It's approved, the budget positions have
Fine.
been approved, but they've been held until the school bus program and there's a genuine need.
Okay, thanks. Well, I'd love to follow up with you more on that and get you the resources you need to make sure we're issuing those violations. And of course, the cost will be offset somewhat by the violation. So
Yes.
I think residents
It'll be
will be
self-sustained.
aware of that as well. I'm very glad to hear
Let
you.
me interrupt on that. The violations do not come to the county, right? The fines.
No,
Yeah,
the automated enforcement fines
The automated enforcement
come
does,
to the county.
but not tickets.
The state tickets go to the state, the
Right.
automated enforcement goes to the county.
Right. Okay.
Right. Thank you. I'm really glad to hear you're doubling the number of cameras. Residents have been asking for more for years. Very glad to hear you're increasing the mobile speed sentries. I've been bringing that up in these hearings for several years. Hopefully we'll have more than the city of Rockville soon. Chief, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned it took 3 years to get camera contracts through procurement.
2 years.
How can we help with that? You have the
Well,
president of the council and the chair of GO here.
Well, I will tell you, I thought I was optimistic when we had a new director of procurement that wanted to streamline these things. But the reality of the situation is these contracts are worth over hundreds of millions of dollars. So procurement dots the I's and cross the T's and makes us go through. So I think the reality and the accepting is that the third contract that's taken over 1.5 to 2 years to implement is the reality is we got to start earlier in the process because it's not going to change.
Okay, please let us know how we can help with that.
Absolutely.
I would like to interject on that just real quick from my perspective. I came here in 2016. I started typing that RFP that is out there now 2 weeks after I got here.
Wow.
We're still
Okay.
not done. One of the hazards of an RFP for this type of program is because of the process. It's not anyone's fault. It's just the nature of the process. If we were to go to a new vendor, all of our sites would likely have to be re-permitted.
Yeah.
With the environment with State Highway that I spoke about earlier, it's quite possible we're going to be out of the red light business completely. So I come from a different place. I'm not from here. Things were much different in Frederick where I was. In my previous career, I would have sole sourced this. Keep the train moving. We need to keep it moving. Apparently, those words are blasphemy here in Montgomery County. The caution is we go through a 3 or 4 year process. This contract has been extended. We just did an extension for a 3rd year. Our vans that are out on the road should have been replaced 3 or 4 years ago. We're putting them together with Scotch tape and baling wire because the vendor is not going to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars into new equipment on a contract that they may not get back.
Right.
That being said, is we will be done in 2021 with a new contract. Dave McBain is on top of it.
All right. Well, this all, both disturbing, but I appreciate the candor. And your comment about your concern, Mr. Hetherington, is that State Highway wants to take away local authority to enforce red light violations?
Again, this is my opinion. They haven't told me this formally, but based on their behavior with our red light permits, they do not believe in red light enforcement. They are under the impression that red light enforcement will create more accidents than they prevent.
Right.
Now, there have been multiple studies out there. Most reputable ones tell us, and our experience here tells us, high angle crashes, people running red lights, T-boning other cars.
Yep.
We've reduced them 15%. We've reduced injuries more than that. State Highway says, well, people know there's a camera there. You see it go yellow, they're going to slam on the brakes. You might have more rear end collisions.
They said that when we passed the law 10 years ago. They said the same thing.
Yeah,
And
Councilmember Hunter was in the General Assembly when we passed that. But the stake is, sir, that the state highway does not have red light cameras. You're not involved in red light cameras. They have to approve them. They don't like them. They don't expect the pedestrian safety aspects. And they disapproved permits in the past and prevented us from putting cameras in locations solely based on perception, not fact.
I appreciate that. I just want to try to keep moving because I got a lot of questions and I'm sure everybody's patience is wearing thin. But I'm really glad we're airing this out. We have the most powerful and largest delegation in the General Assembly. The chair of the committee hails from District 17. And I can't imagine that he is going to allow a diminution of local authority to enforce traffic laws in Montgomery County. So it sounds like need a meeting to get on the same page about this danger.
We plan to work with
afraid
Ms.
of
Winger this year.
Pardon me?
We want to work with Melanie Winger and Office of Government Affairs.
And our delegation, right? It would be good if the Office of Government Relations were here to comment on this. But yeah, and anyway, it sounds like we need another meeting on this. As the packet said, automated enforcement is very much a force multiplier, and we'll never have enough officers to have one on every corridor or arterial. Obviously, yes, we've had a lot of conversations about expansion of automated enforcement. We probably don't need to get too much into it today, but I really hope we are being creative as we approach the onset of the General Assembly and the deadline for local bills, that we are going to see MCP, and I expect we'll see the county executive support for improved and expanded automated enforcement at the state level, because this is something very much on the minds of our residents. Let me bring up, we talked about the racing on Georgia Avenue. We haven't talked about the racing of ATVs and motorcycles on Georgia Avenue in downtown Silver Spring, which has happened before, but was captured on camera and covered by a blogger Sunday night, racing not just on Georgia, but up and down the sidewalks as well, ATVs as well as motorcycles. What's our plan to make sure that doesn't happen again?
We pulled up plans from MSP and Prince George's County to look to see what they have done since they've been experiencing it for a while. The truth and the reality of this is very challenging for law enforcement. We cannot pursue motorcycles, and we have to be very cautious in how we interact with ATVs. As you saw the other day, DC was actually, who does not have similar policy, chased a moped and an individual died, and they've had protests outside their district station. So to tell you the truth, I do not have the answer today. It's on Captain McBain's radar screen. We pulled data from and plans from other people, and we're working with our districts to start coming up with how we're going to handle it, but we don't have it in hand that I can produce to you today.
Okay. We'd like to follow up with you on that. That's very much on the minds of, in particular, the business community and residents in Silver Spring. I asked for Bonifant Street to be reopened west of Georgia Avenue, where it was closed due to Purple Line construction. That has become a gathering place for ATVs and motorcycles that want to race on Bonifant Street and Georgia. We were told by the director yesterday that he was working on it, and then we heard back today that they won't be able to reopen it because there is some expectation that Purple Line construction would resume there sometime soon. So since we don't have a DOT solution here, that means it's really on MCP to increase the enforcement.
Captain McBain hears you, and this is what we need to know. If we can know a date and a time or a possible location, it gives us an opportunity to get an advantage. Yeah,
why don't I send everybody here the video evidence that was shared with me from the Silver Spring
We're
Chamber.
Familiar with it, but the data and the information is what will help us.
The date of the
told
video?
Us where it is and when they're doing it.
Okay, I can send it over. And then just a couple more, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hetherington, I appreciate your recounting of the individual constituent requests for cameras on things like cul-de-sacs or other inappropriate areas. We're all elected officials. We get inappropriate or impractical requests from constituents all the time. I don't want to spend a lot of our valuable time in this hearing on things like that. My experience, I can tell you, is that's not the norm. My experience for years here is residents asking for cameras in sensible areas on arterials or residential streets that suffer from cut-through traffic and speeders and reckless drivers and being denied by MCP. So I'm hearing today that there's some interest in changing that and you're buying more cameras, and I'm eager to work with you to get them where constituents are requesting them for very practical areas.
Just so everybody understands that the requests have to be substantiated via our review process and the data and the traffic.
Right.
Just because we have more cameras doesn't necessarily mean we're just plopping them down.
I very much understand that. It's also, and some of those criteria are enumerated on your website, that people, the web page that people go to request a camera. I would suggest it could, it asks people to read about that and then to just send an email. It doesn't have a form that requests, data fields or video or other evidence that people could, or and just I think other things that you would be looking for, and especially if we're going to buy more cameras and be open to installing more, you might want to revisit that page to seek from residents, probably with the help of Wade, to seek from residents the data fields and data points that you want, rather than just having that one long page and then a request for an email, because it seems, I think many people won't give you the information that you might be looking for.
That's an excellent suggestion. We'll work toward that.
And I just, as you said, Mr. Headington, you got here 4 years ago. I'd be remiss if I didn't share that the perception that I've heard week in, week out, before I was on the council, when I served in the assembly, and certainly since I've been on the council, in particular from business owners too, is that they don't see visible traffic enforcement in Montgomery County, either patrol cars in visible locations, or with cameras giving tickets, or officers in downtown Silver Spring giving tickets for red light violations. People would like to see that much more. If you think they're going to complain to you, believe me, some people complain to me and to all of us, but many, many more people complain that they see traffic violations and reckless drivers and speeders and distracted drivers every day, and they don't see patrol cars or foot officers on the street giving tickets. And the perception is we used to see that more on arterials, and we used to see it more for pedestrian and other violations in downtown Silver Spring, and that has dried up over a couple of years now, and that's a real concern to people. And it's counter to the Vision Zero commitment that we made. You began, Chief, by saying that the council's really driven the commitment to Vision Zero. I feel like we've been a broken record. I appreciate the acknowledgement, but then you also said that you wanted to see more from the council. Please let us know what we could be doing to push the executive branch to emphasize this and prioritize it, because I very much feel like it's what my constituents want, and what I hear countywide as well. I do hear from constituents that when they see traffic enforcement, it's often teens, often black and brown teens, pulled over in Long Branch or Silver Spring. I do not have the evidence. I don't know whether they broke a traffic violation. I assume that they did, but I don't see speeders and reckless drivers pulled over on Connecticut Avenue and Chevy Chase, or in Aspen Hill often, or in farther up in Silver Spring. That's what people have been asking for and expecting to see more of, and feel like has dropped off.
And that's with the reorganization. As I told you, you will not only see that, we will be able to defend where we are, why we're doing, and give you instantaneous on data.
Okay.
So that, I hear you, and I don't disagree with you. We have too much discretion, and we don't have enough coordination. And I've been working on trying to improve this for a decade. I'm really close. I'm hoping we get this in, but yes, I hear you quite clearly.
Let's have a meeting offline about that. And I would just, Mr. Hetherington too, I would urge you to not blithely dismiss frustration from citizens. They're entitled to their opinion. They're based on their lived experience. They pay our salaries. I don't think you wanted to come off that way, but I don't think that's a good look from the department, because more often than not, I hear complaints about the department sort of not being responsive or not getting back to people. And I don't think.
Well, I hear you. I don't disagree with you. And I spend a significant amount of time interacting with citizens, both on the phone and email. I've gone to their residences. I've had them come to my office. I do all those things to engage with them, to help them have a better understanding of what we do. Part of the frustrating part is I do these things. I explain to them the process, what the steps are, what the thresholds are, what makes it a spot that we would choose to go to. And more often than not, once they get that answer, then they're calling you to call me.
And they might not be happy with the answer. I get that. It just comes with our jobs. I appreciate that.
I get that.
Let me just move on. Anyway, we talked about the state delegation. I think we probably need a whole meeting with them or the key members of the E&T committee to talk about. I'd like to hear from you all what changes you're looking for in state legislation, because the deadline is really upon us. One bill, of course, is automated enforcement expansion. One bill is giving us the authority to have lower speed limits, lower than 25 in appropriate residential areas. Is that something you recommend that the county executive support?
Well, I think only with the studies we worked together and talked about in the past, 25 less than 25 with valid reasons or with valid criteria, right. Because then everybody will want 20-mile-an-hour speed roads, and then they'll want speed cameras. So right. We have to be measured, but yes, professionally done, yes.
Right, and absolutely. And DC, of course, just went in that direction. I agree, Mr. Hetherington, that I was, as the captain said, the chief said, on the committee when we passed the speed camera law. Actually, I wanted to go back to your page too. You mentioned school zones. It does not, if I'm looking at it right, mention that we can have speed cameras in municipal jurisdictions or in construction zones. Construction zones, my recollection, we passed that before we passed the school zone.
Only
right?
on controlled access highways, which is state roadway, state MSP. We can't do it in regular construction zones. It has to be right. Controlled access highways. And then municipals, as in Gaithersburg City, Rockville City, Tacoma Park, they have their own programs.
Right, but I'm just pointing out those aren't mentioned on your page. Where do you suggest a speed camera? It only says residential roads with a speed limit of 35 miles per hour or less, or a school zone. In fact, concerned residents who live in Tacoma Park or Rockville or Gaithersburg, concerned residents who live near a construction zone that people speed through on a state road, which is much of Montgomery County.
No, not state roads, controlled access highway.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's not 355, it's 270, 200.
And ICC, right, 200, yeah. Okay.
And those programs are run and managed by state highway. They do have speed cameras in those construction zones, but those are all state highway cameras.
I'm glad. I didn't know if there was a change to the state law, and your page may want to reflect that information, is all I'm saying. All right, I think we got to all of it. Thank you so much for your answers, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Bragg, do you have anything else to add? We appreciate all the good information we received today.
No, I'll stay in touch with Chief Didone and follow up with the data that Councilmember Hucker requested.
Sure. Thank you.
And also the race data, I think, right?
Well, I think we have to work with the state on that, and that's huge. I talk to them all the time. I have a great relationship, but I don't have the weight. There's just no way I can get race data put into crash data, race data returned, and pretext stop field.
So
modify e-text.
Well, if you would, then we will be more than happy to send a letter on your behalf, giving us the information that you would request.
We are going to have an audit. There's going to be an audit coming to the police department dealing with the racial profiling. And I'm sure when the audit gets done, one of the requests are going to be for more data, as everybody has echoed. And that's where I think it'll be the appropriate time. It'll come in from the independent auditors. It'll be supported by the council, and it'll be supported by Reimagine Policing. And then that collectively, you would then be the avenue to help us get it done.
Okay. And Wade, you had your hand up. Did you?
Yeah, I would say one of the issues we have, like you mentioned, those are state systems in terms of acres, which collects the crash data, and e-text, which collects the citations and violations data. The issue isn't necessarily desire to change them, but it's a lot of times comes down to resources. We've had a lot of different requests from both NCDOT, Highway Safety Office, SHA, for certain fields to be corrected or just making certain data validation changes, and they come back and say, we would love to, but we need the resources to do that. So that's one of the limitations at the state level for MSP, state police, is that they don't feel like they have the time to really process those kinds of change requests.
Okay, thank you. And it was pointed out, and perhaps she wants to bring it up now, but Councilmember Navarro has suggested that we have a joint government operations public safety session, committee meetings on procurement, and especially on the boards and everything else that you need. And Councilmember Navarro, you had your hand up, so I don't know whether that was what you were going to be bringing up.
I was going to suggest that maybe also working with our Office of Intergovernmental Relations and our members of the delegation to address some of these issues regarding data. And then, Mr. Chairman, if there are going to be follow-up items from this discussion, maybe, there could be that Public Safety Committee to do that. And then we can have one of the items be a joint item with government operations to discuss and learn a little bit more about the procurement issues and barriers and opportunities to address those barriers so we can get things going. So that was just a general suggestion, because I think we've really touched upon some really important issues today. It's been really productive.
Absolutely. And obviously there's going to be follow-up on a variety of topics on this. And then Vice President Hucker, I believe you had finished, but I might have cut you off. I didn't mean to. But
not at all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're very generous.
Thank you. And Ms. Farag, I know I cut you off and I shouldn't have. Did you have anything else to add?
No, I think that's it for me.
Very good. Well, thank you all once again for giving us all this very good information, for your candor, for telling us what we need to be doing, and we will have follow-up sessions on this. And please, we don't have to wait necessarily for a committee meeting. If there's an issue, please let us know as quickly as you can so that we can help solve those issues as quickly as we can for all areas, whether it be Vision Zero or the police or any other areas. So thank you very much. We appreciate everybody being here, and we are adjourned.
Together as a team. And